How to create weaknesses in pawn structure. Have you ever wondered how to create weaknesses in your opponent's pawn structure? This is a key strategy in chess that can give you a significant edge. Let's break down some effective methods to achieve this. First, let's talk about isolated pawns. These are pawns that have no adjacent pawns to support them. You can encourage your opponent to create isolated pawns by exchanging pieces strategically. For example, if your opponent has a pawn on the d4 square but no pawns on c4 or e4, that d4 pawn is isolated and becomes a target for your pieces. Next, we have doubled pawns. This situation occurs when two pawns are stacked on the same file, often as a result of a piece exchange. To create doubled pawns, you can induce your opponent into a position where they must recapture with a pawn. This can limit their mobility and make it harder for them to defend those pawns. Another type of weakness is the backward pawn. A backward pawn is one that is behind other pawns and cannot advance easily due to an opponent's piece blocking its path. You can encourage your opponent to create backward pawns by positioning your pieces in a way that restricts their pawn movement. Now let's discuss holes. A hole is a square that lacks a pawn to support it. This often happens when pawns are exchanged. You can create holes in your opponent's position by exchanging pawns in strategic locations. This makes it difficult for your opponent to control key squares on the board. Lastly, consider pawn islands. These are groups of pawns that are separated from each other. You can encourage your opponent to create multiple pawn islands by forcing them to move their pawns away from each other. This separation makes it harder for them to support their pawns collectively. Creating weaknesses in your opponent's pawn structure can lead to a space advantage. By controlling more central squares and having more flexible pawns, you limit your opponent's options. This can set the stage for future attacks. Understanding how to create weaknesses in pawn structure is essential for long-term strategic planning. Targeting isolated or backward pawns can become a central part of your game plan. By controlling key squares and limiting your opponent's mobility, you can turn these weaknesses into a pathway for victory.